Good morning, everybody. So, thanks for your flexibility this morning with regard to the start time. Um, this whole week at least, so I just started a new position at work a couple weeks ago, and things are starting to kick in terms of obligations. And oftentimes, not always, I have a morning brief phone call at about at exactly 8 a.m. So, um, almost always I'll be able to finish that phone call. It's a courtesy call to a client, and I have to make it about 8. It takes about 5 minutes, typically, rarely longer than that, which is why I put it at 10 minutes after. So we should be golden. So fingers crossed, we should be golden for the 8:10 start time moving forward, and we'll see. I'd love your guys' thoughts too. We could do an earlier stream at like 7 a.m. my time. So if you guys feel like that would work better, just let me know. I know for you, and for the others of you who are on the other side of the world, upside down all the time, then that might be easier for you guys. I know, but so let me know what you think. But for now, we'll do 8:10 and see how that works. I missed you guys over the weekend. So, as you remember, on Friday we had the reading about. He's like, we started to talk about the question about whether or not God exists. Good morning, Dead Game. So first he says, okay, well, it seems like it's self-evident. So you can't really argue for it because it's self-evident, right? Talked about, okay, well, nothing greater than that. We can't think of anything greater than the thing thought would. You can't think of anything greater than the greatest thing which can be thought, therefore must exist, etc. God's existence is his essence. So when you say, by definition, whenever you say God exists, you're actually identifying him. So obviously it's self-evident. You can't really argue that. So the several examples or the several arguments that he presented to us, trying to actually make irrelevant the entire first book by saying it's not necessary or possible, he's going to now refute. So it's called a refutation of the above-mentioned opinion and a solution of the arguments. In part, the above opinion arises from the custom by which, from their earliest days, people are brought up to hear and to call upon the name of God. Custom, and especially custom in a child, comes to have the force of nature. As a result, what the mind is steeped in from childhood, it clings to very firmly, as something known naturally and self-evidently. In part, however, the above opinion comes about because of a failure to distinguish between that which is self-evident in an absolute sense and that which is self-evident in relation to us. For assuredly that God exists, absolutely speaking, self-evident, since what God is his own being. Yet because we are not able to conceive in our minds that which God is, that God exists remains unknown in relation to us. So too that every whole is greater than its part, absolutely speaking, self-evident, but it would perforce be unknown to one who could not conceive the nature of a whole. Hence it comes about, as it is said in Metaphysics, Book 2, that, quote, our intellect is related to the most knowable things in reality as the eye of an owl is related to the sun. Footnote here, one of the things that's really interesting that Aristotle says is we always know the whole first, but we don't know it as whole until we know the parts as parts. Then we know that thing which we just knew as a thing. Now we understand it to be a whole of certain parts. So first we know the thing, then we come to know the parts, then we understand more deeply that that whole was actually, that thing that we first came to know was actually a whole. So, interesting. And contrary to the point made by the first argument, it does not follow immediately that as soon as we know the meaning of the name God, the existence of God is known. It does not follow first because it is not known to all, even including those who admit that God exists. that God is that than which a greater cannot be thought. After all, many ancients said that this world itself was God. Furthermore, no such inference can be drawn from the interpretations of the name of God to be found in Damascene. What is more, granted that everyone should understand by the name of God something than which a greater cannot be thought, it will still not be necessary that there exists in reality something than which a greater cannot be thought. That's kind of funny construction in English there. For a thing and the definition of a name are posited in the same way. Now, from the fact that which is indicated by the name of God is conceived by the mind, it does not follow that God exists save only in the intellect. Hence, that thing than which a greater cannot be thought will likewise not have to exist save only in the intellect. From this, it does not follow that there exists in reality something than which a greater cannot be thought. No difficulty, consequently, befalls anyone who posits that God does not exist, for that something greater can be thought than anything, given in reality or in the intellect, is a difficulty only to him who admits that there is something than which a greater cannot be thought in reality. Okay. He's basically saying we have this idea that what we mean by God is that being which we can't conceive of anything greater. But he's kind of playing with this. Well, does that mean that just because I've reached the apex of my thought, does that mean that thing actually exists out in reality? Or is that just my thought? So does it exist out there, or is it just in my mind? So obviously here he's justifying why it's a worthy undertaking to examine and to determine whether or not something greater is out there. Nor again is it necessary, as the second argument advanced, that something greater than God can be thought if God can be thought not to be. For that he can be thought not to be does not arise either from the imperfection or the uncertainty of his own being, since this is in itself most manifest. It arises rather from the weakness of our intellect, which cannot behold God himself except through his effects, and which is thus led to know his existence through reason. In other words, since we can't know God directly, we can know him through his effects. We still have to kind of reason there to get back to an understanding of who God is or whether he is. This enables us to solve the third argument as well. For just as it is evident to us that a whole is greater than a part of itself, so to those seeing the divine essence in itself, it is supremely self-evident that God exists because his essence is his being. But because we are not able to see his essence, we arrive at the knowledge of his being not through God himself, but through his effects. The answer to the fourth argument is likewise clear. For a man naturally knows God in the same way as he naturally desires God. Now, man naturally desires God insofar as he naturally desires beatitude, which is a certain likeness of the divine goodness. On this basis, it is not necessary that God considered in himself to be naturally known to man, but only a likeness of God. It remains, therefore, that man is to reach the knowledge of God through reasoning by way of the likeness of God found in his effects. So too with the fifth argument, an easy solution is available, for God is indeed that by which all things are known, not in the sense that they are not known unless he is known, as obtained among self-evident principles, but because all our knowledge is caused in us through his influence. And as we had discussed before, it's that participation in the divine intellect which gives us that light of reason where we can know things. So he's basically saying there's a distinction between that participation in the divine intellect is the power, is what gives us the power to know his effects first. And then through that, we can understand him. One of the things this is kind of alluding to indirectly, he says here, in the last paragraph there, second to last paragraph, he says, man naturally desires God insofar as he naturally desires beatitude. So Aristotle asked the question, in what consists man's happiness, right? Well, look at the word philosopher. The word philosopher, it's seeker of wisdom, lover of wisdom, right? So, or lover of truth. So we have that, he said, wonder, that idea of wonder is the driving force of the philosopher. So when we look at something that we understand something about, but we don't understand it completely, then we're filled with wonder. What is it? What is that I'm scratching the surface of? I want to understand that more. So there's that desire to understand more and more completely. So Aristotle actually says that man's beatitude, man's happiness or bliss, comes only when he knows the first God, the first cause. Because if the first uncaused cause, because everything else, because it's caused, we can understand something of the cause in the effect, right? Since everything we can see and perceive and know directly they're all effects of that one first cause. So until we know that one first cause is cause, we will not be happy, because our mind will not rest, and happiness is rest, right? So it's beautiful, because then it's true. Love is so important. Love is the action of the will, the drawing of the person towards the thing loved, but choosing the good. It's drawn toward the good, but it's for the purpose of resting in that truth. So as long as there's a higher cause that we haven't yet understood, then our will push us to further understand that. So oftentimes you'll hear like the feel-good answer about, oh, well, love is the most important. Love is the most beautiful. Yeah, it's supremely important and supremely beautiful. But what is love pushing us towards? Truth, right? So truth itself is where man's, the understanding of the truth of all things is what is man's happiness. And that's, so it's beautiful, because it kind of underlines the importance of everything, every podcast, every episode, every piece of content, everything that all of us at the Phone Booth Podcast.substack.com that we all push towards, because we're all men seeing darkly in it as in a mirror, right? And we're all wrestling with and trying to find and discover deeper truths. And we're trying to do that together with all of you. And it's supremely important from the standpoint of, that's where we find all of our happiness, is in knowing and resting in the truth. One of my favorite analogies that Aristotle puts forward, I think it's in De Anima, his work on the soul, the human person, the human soul. He says that motion is to rest as reasoning is to conclusion. In other words, by us reasoning and thinking through things, like there's, this more modern tendency, oh, just think about it. It's just so good to think. Just think about everything. Consider everything. In fact, there's a more recent philosophical school of thought called phenomenology, which basically just like, oh, let's look at this object or this reality. Let's look at it from every angle conceivable, but never actually rest in any conclusions or never come to any conclusions about the thing. That's like getting in your car and driving around your block or around the city with no destination perpetually. What's the point, Unless we can come to a conclusion that we can rest in, that our minds rest in, then it's all futile, right? So it's beautiful, because that's what we're doing here. And so welcome to Cup of Jonah. Let's see. Infinite says, I've known from a very young age that he carried me through life, never questioned who or what it was. I felt the Lord. Love that, Infinite. And I think that's a beautiful point, because culturally, in our upbringing, but also in our experience, oftentimes we feel that God. We know his presence. There's a difference between that knowing, that intuition, that gut, that feeling in our heart, that being drawn to him, and a discursive examination and scientific journey towards understanding more deeply who that God is, what he is, how he is, right? So it's really beautiful. And it's actually kind of interesting, almost nostalgic. I mean, nostalgic to a time that I did not live in, but when in the beginning he says, the above opinion that is of God being self-evident, says that it arises from custom by which from their earliest days people are brought up to hear and to call upon the name of God, especially in the customs of regard around children. And what a beautiful time. Like, I just feel like there's a lot today, there's a lot less focus and appreciation, so to speak. I think a lot more people grow up without that rudder, without that cultural certainty that makes it seem to them that there is certainty, and they take it as for granted. It's wonderful that you've had that experience, Infinite. I too had that experience. One of my earliest memories. In fact, I grew up as a first few years of my life where my family was they were Messianic Jews, or Jews for Jesus, as you would call them, and so believed that Jesus was the Messiah, but also believed that the old law, the rites and rituals of the old law, were still to be maintained. Right. So I have a lot of memories of going to synagogue on Saturdays, walking to synagogue on Saturdays, all that stuff. So one of my earliest memories, though, I remember being held up in my dad's arms and seeing the seat next to the rabbi that was empty every single day. Every single Saturday it was empty. Nobody ever sat in it. And that's the tradition was that they had that reserved for Elijah, the prophet who would come again before the return or he would come to prepare the way for the Messiah, as is the Jewish tradition, right? So that was one of my earliest memories, which is why, Elijah, I've always had a devotion to Elijah myself. Shiva, yes. Do you all have your morning cup? Shiva says, like and repost the video. Absolutely. I would appreciate that. It's, I love having you all here. Don't forget to, like and reshare. But also, please check out the Phone Booth podcast, all the good stuff going on there. Lots of truth seekers wrestling with these more subtle and more noble truths, to not only delight in those truths ourselves, but invite you into it and share it with you. So it's really interesting, and it's really beautiful. And you can see he's already now. So one thing that's really cool about the scholastic method, which I mentioned a little bit last week, is that whenever setting out to answer a question, it's kind of like the Toastmasters debate style, where in the scholastic method, you present first the arguments against the position that you're going to argue for, and then respond to those objections first, which we've seen now. Excuse me. And then he'll go back and explain his reasoning to and his justification for the existence of God. Tomorrow, the chapter heading is The Opinion of Those Who Say That the Existence of God Cannot Be Demonstrated, but is held by faith alone. So it's kind of cool. He's kind of like knocking out the bookends, right? On the left side, he's got the first side. He's like, okay, it's so obvious you can't even argue for it. The reason the mind already knows it. It's fine. And then on the other side, now he turns to tomorrow. He'll be like, well, it's actually not obvious. Not only is it not self-evident, but it's also, you need to prove it. I mean, you can't even prove it. The mind can't even prove it. that God exists. You have to accept it just by faith. So it's kind of cool, the two extremes. Aristotle says virtue is in the mean. So it's kind of neat to see, even in this question about God exists, we can see these two opposing extremes, so to speak. And then the real fun begins day after tomorrow. Arguments in proof of the existence of God. That's when day after tomorrow, so that'll be Wednesday. And that's the one I think we'll probably spend the rest of the week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, on that one, because unlike all these other chapters, which have been a page or two max, this one is substantially longer, probably 8 pages. So we'll have to break that one up, and even then, those will be a little bit longer than we're used to. But it'll be lovely. That's kind of like the first meaty question that we're going to be attacking, and seeking to find rest in the conclusion. So, wonderful. Well, let's see. Any other comments here? I must say, as we wrap up today, that, again, I know I've said this before, but these morning streams have become, these morning readings together have become the highlight of my day. And I really appreciate all of you being here to read and reason through these things with me, and being in the comments and reposting and all the love you show. So it's a delight, and it's become a treasure of mine. So I appreciate you all. With that, I bid you adieu for today, and I look forward to examining the arguments that say that the existence of God cannot be demonstrated at all, but we must resort to faith. God love you all. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy your cup of Jonah, and I'll see you tomorrow.